Pathology is a profession where every day begins with unanswered questions. There is no room for speculation here, only facts, tools, and respect for those who have already left. Today we will hear 3 stories from the first person, the real memories of practicing doctors. They share them anonymously without embellishment, based on their experience. From the first steps in the morgue to cases that leave a mark for a lifetime. This is not a scenario, but a reality. Lessons about human fragility, ethics, and the quiet power of the profession. I am not insane. At least that's what I keep telling myself. It's perfectly normal to be afraid of the dark. The dead. The dead that lingers in the dark. I'm not usually one to question my sanity. But as I sit here in the parking lot of a closed retail store, rain pattering on my windshield, the only thing I can really question is my sanity. I'm a forensic pathologist and I worked my ass off to get here. Damn proud of where I am. The only real downside to the job is I spend most of my time in the morgue, and for the hospital I'm at, well, for most hospitals usually, it's in the basement. You see, I don't really have a problem with that. The dead are dead. I find that being able to provide closure to the families of the deceased is fulfilling. You don't know how much of a long way just being able to provide a why to the death of a daughter, a mother, a son, a father goes. And that's what I do. The only real issue with the place is it hasn't seen a fresh paint job in at least 100 years, so everything is a bit dated. It also has that constant smell of formaldehyde, which I can only describe as burnt vinegar. But the place provides for the job, and that's all that really matters. My day usually starts with a body. I perform the autopsy, examine it, do the paperwork, CT scan. This means I usually spend at least half the day in the morgue, and the rest of it in the opposite room separated by a hallway and double doors. The office room is laid out so that I can peer through the windows of the doors and have a view of the morgue. My technician is usually still working when I file the reports, so it's helpful to still have an idea of what's going on should I need to go inside. That's a peer into my life for the past 5 years, not accounting for the decade of study before that. And after what happened, and what is continuing to happen, I question if this life is still for me. I've been assigned to afternoon duty for a while now. It usually starts at around 4 p.m. and ends at about 2 a.m., so I'm in the morgue until the late hours of night. And although my morgue technician is usually with me, I often stay later than they do in order to file the reports. Without them there, the only noise that fills the room is the strong, persistent buzz of the incandescent light bulb, which gives me the ability to see. Yesterday was a particularly difficult start to the day. My technician, Ned, was late, and that had placed the job of the body preparation and the autopsy to myself. This set me back hours. And when he finally arrived at 6 p.m., I was in the middle of the autopsy. I remember being mad, but I was relieved that he had shown up at all. The rest of the day after that was fairly normal, except at around 1 a.m. Ned began to feel a bit ill. Considering we are amidst a pandemic, I requested that he go home for the day, as all I had left to do was store the body and file the reports. Whilst wheeling the body down the hallway to the storage room, I saw Ned walking towards me. His walk was uncanny. It's almost as if his joints weren't bending the right way for a normal stride. He walked right past me without a single look in my direction. The exit to the morgue and to the main hospital floor is opposite the storage room, so I wondered why he was even coming from this way at all. Didn't think much about it though. I stored the body, went to my office, and settled in for a particularly late night. About 30 minutes in, I realized I had forgotten a report in the lab. Going to the lab from my office allows you to have a view into the hallway. This hallway isn't straight as it curves off heading toward the storage room, placing the doors to the body storage out of sight. I glanced toward the end of the hallway as I made that short transition from my office to the lab. I noticed that the hallway lights from right around the corner were off. Electrical faults are bound to happen, but at this moment I did not care. I usually did not have a problem with the body storage, but at this moment, with the lights off, I can only say that evil was emanating from around that corner, and I could feel its presence fill the entire hallway. I stared at it for what felt like eternity, and could swear I had seen something momentarily peek out from around the corner. As quickly as that feeling came, it faded. The lights buzzed back on and all was well. I was tired, and it felt right to laugh about how stupid that was. Getting scared at lights turning off when I knew that the morgue probably hasn't been renovated in my lifetime. I grabbed the missing report and went back to work. I would be lying if I said I just continued. A shiver had lingered. It was almost as if it was a drop in temperature. The presence felt in the hall never went away. It just faded, backed away, and now resided behind me. It was now around 3 a.m. The heaviness of the day was starting to sink in, and I figured I could just finish the final report tomorrow. I went to the file closet, back turned to the office door, when I heard some noises. The noises were soft at first, but they eventually grew louder. The unmistakable thumps of someone walking along the tiled floor, sounding as if the feet were soaked. I paid no attention to them at first. I figured it was my heart pounding in my head, but it stopped, and it had stopped in front of my door. Evil emanated from behind me, the same evil felt in the hallway earlier that night. I was scared, truly in fear, but I could not help but turn around. The only thing I could see through my office door was that the lab lights were off and something was shuffling around inside it. For a brief second, it looked at me. Its face looked like Ned's, but its eyes, it had none. At this point, I did not care about anything. I booked it. I dashed out the office door and ran up the fire stairs to the main hospital floor, then all the way to my car. I could hear something behind me for that entire time, chasing, its footsteps matching mine with every stride, and the only way to tell that something was there was the distinct sound of wet-sounding footsteps. This brings me to where I am now, at a closed retail store parking lot, in my car, in the rain. I post this here to cry for help. I truly believe that as soon as I leave this car, something is out there. Something from the morgue that isn't supposed to be here is going to hurt me. I think the answer to this is complicated, and perhaps not quite what people tend to think on the surface. Many people seem to think it's about money. I disagree. While money makes a difference, it doesn't make all the difference. Yeah, if people were regularly seeing 400K plus right out of fellowship, more folks on the fence would have an easier decision to make. But there are already other subspecialties which can make in that range people could pursue, and others that make less than FPs do now and aren't really any less competitive, and people go into those too. I.e., I don't think money is the most important part of the average decision tree. It's just the most obvious modifiable factor. I suspect quite a lot has to do with FP being such a niche of a niche. Almost everything about general pathology is completely different to just about every other medical specialty, subspecialty. And almost everything about FP is different to most of general pathology. Medical schools recruit with an eye toward the clinical specialties. Medical school itself is an utter mess. Granted, a lot of programs have started spreading out the old school, basic science-only first couple of years in favor of building more of a clinical background. But the cultural subcurrent is that one is supposed to find a way to use all that for clinical purposes. Pathophysiology is a barrier one must academically climb in order to be allowed to do what's actually important, the clinical stuff. It's also a fairly manual subspecialty. While radiology has gone largely electronic, and a lot of sign-out can be done remotely, autopsies are still autopsies. But it lacks the romantic magic of surgery. There is also still a tremendous lack of understanding of the things that are difficult in FP. Many people still view it largely as a documentation of the obvious subspecialty. Pull some bullets, draw some injuries. Anybody can do it. And in some cases that's even basically true. The problem, of course, is when it isn't, and things can be missed and buried forever. But that gets off track. Point being, FP is often taken for granted, and as someone already said, it tends to make the media only when something either goes wrong, is missed, or more commonly, is just high profile for social political reasons. Lastly, for now, it is not exactly a portable subspecialty. Yes, there are lots of jobs out there, relatively speaking, but not in the sense that one can find a place to live, then expect to find a job there, or just set up shop wherever and get jurisdictional cases, or quit one job and find another without having to move. It just isn't like that, for the most part, in contrast to many other subspecialties. The resources of the human body are practically inexhaustible, says the man who has dissected more than 10,000 corpses. A pathologist is a scary and mysterious profession. He deals with death every day. The Department of Pathological Anatomy is somewhat reminiscent of the afterlife. Everyone suspects his existence, but no one has returned from there alive. The autopsy table of the pathologist is the finale. This is the point. This is horror. Maybe that's why jokes are most often told about this medical specialty. It makes it easier to protect yourself from fear. I grew up in a medical family. I saw my first autopsy before I was 10 years old. After the Civil War, my father was in charge of a rural hospital. The boys found buried rifles with cartridges left over from the First World War. They sawed off the barrel of the gun and filled it with gunpowder. It turned out to be a DIY project. They fired once and everything was fine. And the second time, the rivet was knocked out and it pierced one kid's head. My father was doing the autopsy and I was peeking out the window. And then the war started. It remained in my memory for the rest of my life. This soldier is lying next to his helmet, and in it there are smoking brains. My father operated on the wounded from the first day of the war. Soon I started helping him. So when I stood at the autopsy table as a pathologist, I was already familiar with death. But you still can't get used to death. You can learn to really evaluate it. In general, a doctor should feel human pain. If he doesn't feel it, it means he's no longer a doctor. And at the same time, he must think rationally. How to find a way out. How to save a patient's health or life. I try not to think about death. I'm investigating why it happened, because a person could still live. The pathologist makes the most accurate and definitive diagnosis. Any doctor is limited in examining a patient. He determines the disease through examination, preliminary tests, but does not see what is happening to organs and tissues. As they say, only one person is not mistaken, the pathologist. An experienced specialist can understand exactly what was happening in the body from the examined organ alone. One tissue can reveal a number of pathologies. Every disease leaves its mark on the body. And every treatment, too. After an autopsy and examination, we can tell what injuries a person has suffered, what diseases, what and how he was treated, and, most importantly, what was cured. All medical errors are perfectly visible. I believe that the attending physician must necessarily be present at the autopsy in order to understand what he was mistaken about. Another thing is that not all doctors want us to figure it out. Many surgeons feel very uncomfortable with this. According to the law, relatives can refuse an autopsy, and some doctors, who are not sure that they did everything right to save their patient, persuade them to write a statement saying that they are against an autopsy. They say he's already exhausted himself. Why else cut him up? It happens that relatives come with questions. What happened? Why he died? But I always send them to their doctor. After all, he saw a person alive, observed the dynamics of the disease, and we don't immediately give the autopsy report to the relatives. Reading this immediately after the death of a loved one is unpleasant. Actually, I've been sympathizing with my relatives for a long time. Of course, I share their grief and I'm sorry. But I understand that I have to complete the medical process and understand whether it was possible to help or not. What was done wrong? What was unfinished? Have there been any conflicts with the relatives of the deceased? Well, there have been several such cases. For example, one woman died. We removed her brain because there was a very complex pathology that needed to be studied. The deceased's husband had some kind of mental perversion. He brought the body home, stitched the skull, discovered the shortage, and caused a big scandal. After all, it's one thing when a complete stranger lands on your desk, it's another when... Do you want to ask if you have ever seen a dead man during his lifetime? Alas, yes. When there was a stalemate, I had to open my friend several times. We had one professor who died, and it was not clear from what, from intoxication or from metastases. I knew this man well, but it's a job. I realize that I am not doing evil, but doing good to those who have remained alive. Medicine cannot exist without educational practice. Where do the bodies that students are taught on come from? These are mostly rootless corpses, either those who have been abandoned by relatives or those who have no relatives at all. By the way, there is a myth that those who were put to death were given away for experiments. This is not true. When we had an execution, the bodies of those executed were supposed to be cremated. But it used to be better before. Now there is one corpse per several student groups, but it's still good practice. Students from Arab countries often come to us because all autopsies except for forensic ones are prohibited. They are very willing to come to my department. This is a unique opportunity for them to dissect the brain. From my point of view, death is a complex biological process. Vital centers are shutting down. At the same time, the body itself continues to live for some time. The simpler the organization of the fabric, the longer it lives. Hair, as you know, continues to grow. It happens that the brain is already turned off, but the heart is still working. But the brain loses its biological essence within a few hours. The heart can still beat. The person can even breathe. But he can't be called alive. In my field, neurosurgery, the inevitable death is caused either by extensive destruction of the hemispheres or by the death of the brain stem cells. The brain itself weighs 1.6 kilograms, and the barrel is only 35 to 40 grams. But this small area is responsible for breathing, heart function, and vascular pressure. Once I had to open the wife of a police officer. I don't know what happened to her, jealousy or something else, but she put a hunting rifle to her head and fired. The shot penetrated the whole brain, but it didn't hit the stem section. She lived for a whole week. Another case. We have an entrepreneur who has become a victim of some kind of redistribution in the trading business. We look, and he has a small dot at the inner edge of his eye. It turns out that they pierced his brain through his eye with some kind of knitting needle, and nothing happened. He lived for a whole day. In the early post-war years, I had to see a brain literally stuffed with skull fragments, and the man lived with it for a long time. It happened that suicides could be saved. If a person shoots himself in the temple and does not bleed, then there is a chance to save him. However, when a secondary hemorrhage occurs sometime after the injury and the brain stem stops working, then the person dies. Tell me, how much reserve does a living person have? You know, I'm afraid to even say it out loud, but sometimes I think it's boundless. Man is an extraordinarily resilient creature, and the doctor's task is to help the body recover by removing the pathogenic principle. A lot depends on the genetic predisposition. There are people who have a natural program of 80 years of existence. If this program is not violated by any external influences and bad habits, then he will live his 80 years. They say that our stock is about 130 years old. I'm a bit of a superstitious person. I believe that a pathologist does not need to be interested in living patients unnecessarily. It is better not to approach them. although sometimes I have to participate in operations. After all, I have a lot of experience. I've seen more. I feel the fabric better. Surgeons invite me as an anatomical topographer. They consult with me during complex operations. What is this? Can I squeeze this vessel, or will there be complications? It's easier for the surgeon. He consulted with me and the responsibility fell on me. And I go back to my room and suffer, whether the patient survived or not. Then I call every morning and ask, how is the patient? What is the future of pathology? Can all kinds of CT scanners, computers, etc. replace humans? Of course, there are amazing technologies now. For example, the so-called vascular magnetic resonance imaging program has been created. You can see all the vessels in the picture with all the bends, plaques, and aneurysms. There is a spiral tomograph in which the magnet rotates, and a complete picture of the altered organ is obtained. All this is being improved every year. But all the same, pathoanatomic services will remain in the coming centuries. You will always need to feel the fabric. An autopsy will always be necessary.